Naomi Ellis was no ordinary traveler. She was the Chief Justice of the United States Court of Appeals, one of the highest-ranking legal authorities in the nation. But at a crowded international airport, dressed like any other business-class passenger, she became a target, not for what she did, but for how she looked. In the span of minutes, a racially biased accusation turned into a public humiliation. 2 officers, fueled by prejudice and unchecked power, detained and handcuffed her without cause. They didn't know her name. They didn't ask. And they had no idea they had just handcuffed the very person who held the power to end their careers. What followed was not just one woman's fight for dignity, but a national reckoning, because this wasn't just a mistake, it was a message. And Naomi? She answered with the full weight of the law. If you've ever wondered what happens when justice itself is put on trial, you're about to find out. Don't forget to share where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. The doors of the airport precinct swung open with a harsh metallic clunk. Chief Justice Naomi Ellis emerged, wrists still marked red from the cuffs that had bound her. Her tailored blazer hung slightly off-center, the result of the forceful restraint she'd just endured. The flashing of cameras erupted like a strobe storm, microphones thrust toward her face. Reporters called out, voices crashing into one another like a wave. "Justice Ellis, were you assaulted? Are you filing federal charges? Did they know who you were?" She didn't speak. Her expression was firm, unreadable. She pulled the sleeve of her blazer down gently, covering the irritated skin. Behind her, just beyond the glass doors, 2 officers stood frozen in disbelief. Officer Mark Delaney looked like he'd seen a ghost. Officer Tyler Maddox couldn't lift his eyes from the floor. They thought they could silence her. Instead, they handed her the power to end their careers. 48 hours earlier, Logan International Airport was its usual chaos. Flights delayed, announcements echoing in sterile English, travelers dragging luggage with hurried steps. The terminal hummed with impatience. At Gate B10, passengers waited to board Flight 672 to Chicago. Chief Justice Naomi Ellis stood alone at the front of the business class line. To most, she was just another high-level professional heading home. Her slate-gray suit was crisp, her posture composed, her face calm. She clutched a leather-bound portfolio and a boarding pass tucked into her passport. A direct flight, a quiet seat, and 3 days of court prep ahead. Routine, except one woman didn't see routine. She saw offense. Carla Whitman, seated across from the line, glared at Naomi, as though her presence were some sort of provocation. Carla was in her mid-60s, dressed head to toe in designer brands, her gold bangles clinking every time she shifted with exaggerated sighs. Her expression, tight-lipped and superior, spoke volumes. "He doesn't belong there," she muttered loudly to no one in particular. Unbelievable what they allow these days. Naomi heard it, but didn't react. This wasn't new. These looks, the subtle barbs, the side eyes. She'd faced them in courtrooms, at law conferences, on Capitol Hill. Still, she stayed focused, scrolling through her tablet, rereading briefs on upcoming appellate cases. But Carla wasn't done. With the self-righteous energy of someone convinced she was protecting something sacred, Carla marched up to the gate agent. "Excuse me," she said with faux urgency. "That woman right there? Yes, her. She's been staring at my bags. Something's off. I don't feel safe getting on this flight with her." The agent blinked. "Ma'am, she's in the business class line and has already—" "Doesn't matter," Carla cut in. "You need to check her credentials. I've traveled enough to know when something isn't right." The gate agent tried to de-escalate. "Ma'am, she went through the proper screening. Maybe she used someone else's pass. Maybe it's fake. Look at her. You should call security." And just like that, a false sense of danger was planted. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers, Delaney and Maddox, walked into the scene. Both men were already on edge. A long day, a crowded terminal, and now a concerned white woman making claims of suspicious behavior. Their default setting? Control. Carla turned up the drama as soon as she saw them. "Officers, thank God," I don't feel safe near that woman. She's acting strange. Watching me, watching my luggage. I don't know what she's planning. Delaney narrowed his eyes in Naomi's direction. Maddox cracked his knuckles. Ma'am, Delaney said as they approached Naomi. Step out of the line, please. We need to ask you a few questions. Naomi looked up slowly from her tablet. Her eyes moved from Delaney to Maddox, then briefly to Carla, who stood off to the side with a smug tilt of her chin. What is this about? Naomi asked evenly. We received a complaint, Maddox said. You've been making another passenger uncomfortable. Naomi blinked once, calmly. By standing in line? We just need to verify your credentials. Step aside. There was no point in resisting. Naomi stepped forward, away from the line. Maddox's posture was aggressive from the start. Name, ID, boarding pass. Naomi pulled them from her purse, handed them over without hesitation. Delaney glanced at the document. Naomi Ellis, he read aloud. Business class. Huh. His tone carried judgment he didn't bother to hide. What do you do for a living? He asked. Naomi met his gaze. I uphold justice. Delaney raised an eyebrow. Is that right? She didn't flinch. You'll find out soon enough. At that moment, the air shifted. Carla whispered to a nearby traveler, clearly enjoying the scene she'd created. Maddox leaned in closer to Naomi, his voice lower and colder. Why all the questions? You acting nervous about something? Naomi's voice stayed steady. I'm asserting my civil rights. Something you sworn to protect. Maddox laughed once, sharp. You think you're smarter than us, huh? Naomi looked between the two of them. I want your badge numbers. The words sliced through the noise of the terminal like a siren. The officers stiffened. Passengers began to take notice. A few pulled out phones. One person began recording. That was the moment the temperature shifted. The eyes turned sharper. The stares turned to whispers. And it all began with Carla's gaze. That first spark of quiet contempt that would soon become an inferno. Carla Whitman had traveled in luxury her entire life. She preferred first class over business, private terminals over public gates, and her voice, refined and rehearsed, rarely heard the word no. She was used to being catered to, nodded at, taken seriously on sight. But today something disturbed her balance. A black woman standing calmly in the business class line. To Carla, this wasn't just inconvenient, it was offensive. Chief Justice Naomi Ellis stood with a tablet in hand, professionally dressed, exuding self-assurance. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't fidget. She looked entirely at ease. And that was the problem. Carla sat nearby, gripping the handle of her designer suitcase, her face twisted with disdain as she watched Naomi check her flight time. A scoff escaped her lips. She leaned to the man beside her, stranger or not, and muttered, "What are we letting through these lines now? It's ridiculous." The man shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Carla's voice rose. "That one's in business class?" "I doubt it." A gate attendant behind the counter glanced over but remained silent. Carla stood, her bracelets jangling like wind chimes, and stepped closer to the gate desk. Her heels clicked with exaggerated purpose. She didn't look around to gauge others' reactions. She assumed they agreed. "Excuse me," she said, her tone laced with a fake politeness. "I have a concern." The young woman at the counter smiled. "Yes, ma'am." "That woman in the line," Carla pointed without hesitation. "The one in the gray suit. She's been shifting around, looking at people's luggage. I don't feel comfortable boarding the plane with someone behaving that way." The agent blinked, caught off guard. "Ma'am, she checked in normally and passed through all security measures?" Carla didn't back down. "That's not the point. She's acting strange. Something about her seems off." The agent glanced toward Naomi, who remained unaware of the exchange. "She hasn't done anything that violates airport policy." Carla leaned in, dropping her voice but not her intensity. "Do you know how easy it is to fake documents these days? People print boarding passes all the time." "You have no idea who she is." The agent hesitated. Carla pressed harder. "I'm telling you this because I care about safety. If she isn't who she says she is, or if she's using someone else's ID, that's on you. I'm asking you to verify her identity. It's a basic security measure." There was a beat of uncertainty. The agent nodded slightly, unsure of what else to do. Carla smiled, satisfied. She turned away, but not before adding loudly enough for others to hear, "Honestly, I don't feel safe flying with her. Someone needs to do something before it's too late." The words hung in the air like a threat. Several passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at Naomi, others looked away. The agent picked up a small radio behind the desk. Her voice was quiet but urgent. Within moments, she had relayed Carla's complaint to airport security. Carla returned to her seat, a smug grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. She crossed her legs and sipped from a bottle of imported water. She didn't need to check whether her message had taken effect. She knew it would. She watched Naomi with calculated detachment. Naomi hadn't even glanced in her direction. She remained focused on her tablet, unaware of the accusation now circulating behind her back. Another passenger, middle-aged, glasses, holding a briefcase, turned to Carla. "Excuse me," he said, hesitant. "Do you really think she's a threat?" Carla didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. You can't be too careful nowadays. I trust my instincts." The man nodded but said nothing more. Carla saw his uncertainty and relished it. The gate agent tried to remain composed, but her eyes kept darting toward the business class line. A ripple of tension ran through the area. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, but it was enough to shift the energy in the terminal. Carla had done this before, subtle, persuasive, always stopping just short of being overtly hateful. She'd mastered the performance. She wasn't yelling or calling names. She was concerned. She was reasonable. She was, in her own eyes, the voice of order in a world slipping into chaos. And now, the next step was unfolding, right on cue. A low crackle came from the gate agent's earpiece. She looked up, nodded quickly, and set the radio down. Her eyes went briefly to Naomi. She took a small step back from the counter, as if preparing for something unpleasant. Carla didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. She tilted her head slightly, watching the far end of the terminal. From a security corridor, two uniformed airport police officers emerged. Officer Delaney and Officer Maddox walked with intention, their expressions flat and focused. They weren't running, there was no urgency, but their presence was enough to shift the attention of several nearby travelers. Passengers stepped aside, phones rose discreetly. Someone began recording. The officers didn't ask questions at the counter. They didn't stop to verify the nature of the complaint. They didn't even glance at the security feed. The call had come from a white woman in expensive clothes using words like uncomfortable and suspicious. That was enough. Delaney looked ahead, eyes narrowing as he scanned the line. Maddox cracked his neck and adjusted his belt. The air pace quickened. Officer Mark Delaney approached with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. His walk was deliberate, posture upright, a man used to being obeyed. 30 years in uniform had taught him how to size people up fast. At least, that's what he believed. He prided himself on reading a room, reading a face, and reading between lines that weren't even there. Beside him, Officer Tyler Maddox moved with a different kind of energy. Tight, forceful, impulsive. His eyes locked on Naomi with immediate suspicion. There was no conversation between the two officers. They didn't need it. Their roles were understood. Naomi Ellis remained exactly where she was, quiet, composed, her attention seemingly still on the tablet in her hand. She looked up as the officers neared, but didn't move. Delaney spoke first, voice clipped and official. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is there an issue?" "Step out of the line," Maddox added, already stepping into her personal space. Naomi slipped her tablet into her leather bag and stood upright, adjusting the strap on her shoulder with measured calm. "Of course." Delaney gestured for her to move to the side of the boarding line. Naomi complied without protest. Her heels tapped lightly against the tiled floor as she followed passengers. Nearby looked on silently. Some whispered. A few began filming discreetly, unsure of what was happening but sensing something off in the officer's posture. Too aggressive, too eager. Once she was out of the line, Maddox squared up to her. "Name?" he asked bluntly. Naomi reached into her handbag, pulled out her driver's license and boarding pass, and handed them over without hesitation. Her fingers didn't shake. Her expression didn't shift. Delaney took the documents and gave them a quick once-over. Naomi Ellis, he read slowly. Business class. He said it like it was a question, like it didn't make sense. Naomi didn't blink. What brings you to Chicago? Delaney asked. Her big ears danced, and she answered. What do you do for a living? Naomi looked him straight in the eye. I uphold justice. The pause after her words wasn't long, but it was dense. Delaney cocked his head, as if trying to decode her tone. Maddox smirked. That's supposed to mean something? He asked, tone half sarcastic. It means I work in law, she said, flat but firm. Maddox crossed his arms. You a lawyer or something? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She watched them both, as if measuring how much they actually wanted to know and how much they could handle if they did. I'm not obligated to share personal employment details without probable cause, she replied calmly. Delaney raised a brow. We're asking because of a security complaint. Naomi gave a small nod. Then I assume you have reason to suspect I've committed a crime? Neither officer answered that. Delaney looked back down at her ID, then up at her again, as if still processing something that didn't quite compute. Maddox stared harder now, irritated by her composure. Are these your real documents? Maddox asked suddenly. Naomi's jaw tensed just slightly, but her tone stayed steady. Are you questioning the legitimacy of my federal-issued identification? I'm questioning your attitude, Maddox snapped. Naomi took a quiet breath. Is there a specific statute or protocol that allows you to detain or question me based solely on someone feeling uncomfortable with my presence in a boarding line? Delaney shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. Maddox didn't flinch. You're not being detained, then. I'm free to board my flight? Not until we clear this up, he said. Naomi folded her arms across her chest, not defiant but firm. And what exactly needs clearing up? My ticket is valid. My ID is authentic. I have not breached any airport security policies. Maddox stepped closer. You're being difficult. I'm being precise, she corrected. Delaney cut in, trying to regain control. Look, just answer the questions and we'll be done here. I've answered everything that's required by law, Naomi said. Beyond that, I'm under no obligation to indulge in suspicion that's rooted in bias. Delaney frowned. We're not biased. She tilted her head slightly. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you approached me without first reviewing surveillance footage or consulting with the reporting party to verify details? Delaney didn't respond. Naomi continued, voice low but razor sharp. Because from where I stand, it looks like you acted on one person's word without corroborating evidence. One person's fear. One person's prejudice. Maddox bristled. You think we'd waste time over someone's feelings? I think that's exactly what's happening, Naomi replied. Delaney handed back her license and boarding pass, but his face showed irritation. Next time, don't act so confrontational. Naomi slipped the items back into her purse. I wasn't confrontational, I was asserting my rights. The tension between them simmered. Maddox was visibly restraining himself from snapping. Delaney kept glancing around, noting the phones aimed in their direction. Naomi stood in place. She made no move to walk away, waiting instead for the situation to resolve itself. Lawfully, Delaney opened his mouth, but Naomi spoke first. May I ask for your names and badge numbers for my records? Delaney hesitated. Maddox looked like he'd been slapped. You're kidding, right? Maddox said. It's a lawful request. Naomi replied. Delaney hesitated again, then answered. Delaney, 6482 Maddox. Maddox didn't respond. Naomi kept her voice even. And yours, officer? Why do you need that? Maddox shot back. Naomi didn't blink. Because I believe you've already crossed several lines of protocol, and if this interaction continues the way it has, I may need to report misconduct. Delaney looked at Maddox, suddenly unsure of what to say. Officer Delaney had hesitated before giving his badge number. Maddox, however, remained motionless, jaw set tight, his eyes sharp with irritation. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who stayed calm when he was clearly trying to provoke. Naomi stood poised. She wasn't aggressive, she didn't raise her voice, but her presence was cutting through the air like a scalpel. Controlled, specific, exacting. "I'll need your badge number as well," she said again, eyes on Maddox. Maddox stepped forward. "You think you can demand things from me?" "I'm exercising my rights under U.S. civil law," Naomi replied. "Specifically, Title 42, Section 1983. I have the right to request identification from any officer engaged in a public interaction, especially one that may be unlawful or discriminatory." Delaney's mouth tightened. He knew that reference. Most officers did. Civil rights violations were serious business, and most of them started with the wrong kind of stop, or the wrong kind of ego. Maddox didn't back down. "You think you're in some kind of courtroom? You're not." Naomi didn't flinch. "No, but you're acting like this airport is your private domain." The pause was suffocating. Travelers nearby could sense the tension. Phones were out, recording lights were on. A low hum of murmurs spread through the gate area like static electricity before a storm. Delaney took half a step back, scanning the faces forming a quiet audience. Naomi continued, "I was approached without probable cause. I was not observed engaging in any illegal behavior. The sole justification for this stop appears to be the subjective discomfort of another passenger." "You don't know what was reported," Maddox snapped. "Then you can clarify it," Naomi answered. "I'm open to hearing what, specifically, I've done that prompted this." Maddox's lips curled. "You think you're clever. I think I'm educated," Naomi replied coolly, "and aware of what law enforcement is and is not permitted to do." Delaney shifted uneasily again. He'd seen these situations before, not exactly like this, but close enough. An encounter begins simple. Someone gets defensive, someone else pushes, then it escalates. Maddox wasn't reading the warning signs. His jaw clenched tighter. His right hand hovered near the cuff pouch at his belt. Naomi saw it, but didn't react. Instead, she doubled down, speaking with calm precision. "If this is an official investigation, I'd like to know the nature of the suspicion. If not, then I have the right to be left alone." "Lady, we don't owe you an explanation," Maddox barked. "You're acting suspicious just by talking the way you are." Naomi raised her chin slightly. "Being articulate is not grounds for detainment," Maddox snapped. "You're not in charge here." Delaney finally stepped in. "Tyler," he said, low, urgent, but Maddox ignored him. "You're trying to play lawyer. Guess what? Out here, we're the law." Naomi's voice didn't waver. "That's not how the Constitution works." Maddox's face turned a shade redder. "You want to keep pushing? You want to see how far this can go?" "I want to see if either of you remembers your oath," Naomi said. Delaney exhaled, audible and shaky. The surrounding crowd had grown. Quietly, instinctively. Travelers who had once been busy with phones and children were now standing still, watching. Naomi looked directly at Maddox. "You've now threatened me verbally, twice. You've refused to provide your badge number, and you've continued this engagement without probable cause or factual evidence of wrongdoing." Maddox's voice rose. "This ends now. I'm done playing your game." Delaney looked at him, eyes wide. Don Maddox pointed a finger directly at Naomi's face. "This isn't some debate. You don't get to walk away just because you memorized a few laws." Naomi stepped back half an inch, not in fear, but to remove herself from his space. "Back off," she said with steel in her tone. Maddox took that as defiance. "You're resisting?" "No," Naomi answered. "I'm recording this for my safety." He reached for her phone. The movement was calm, telegraphed open. Maddox lunged. His hand grabbed her wrist before she could open the phone's camera. The contact was rough, fast, unnecessary. Gasps shot through the watching crowd. Naomi didn't fight back. She didn't scream. She locked eyes with him. "You just escalated this to assault," she said. Delaney stepped forward too late. Maddox kept his grip tight. "You're under investigation for interfering with police activity." Naomi didn't move. "I was answering questions, not interfering. Turn around," Maddox growled. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. Naomi said, "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do," he shouted. "You'll regret this." "You think I care?" Maddox spat. Delaney finally said, "Maddox, stand down," but it was too late. The moment Maddox reached for his cuffs again, cameras from every direction captured the scene. Multiple angles, live streams, witnesses. Delaney ran a hand over his face. Naomi stayed upright. Her voice was calm as ever. "You're making a mistake that won't be forgotten." Maddox didn't respond. The sound of the cuffs clicking open echoed like a gunshot across the gate. The cuffs clicked into place with a sharp, final snap. Officer Tyler Maddox stood behind Naomi Ellis, pulling her wrists tighter than necessary as he locked the steel bands around them. The cold metal dug into her skin, marking her not just physically, but symbolically. It was the sound of power, misused. The sound of control asserted by force instead of reason. Around them, the gate area erupted. "What are you doing?" someone shouted. "You can't do that!" Another voice rang out from the line of passengers. Phones were raised instantly. Red record icons blinked across multiple screens. Voices mixed. Outrage, confusion, disbelief. People leaned over railings, stepped out of lines, watched from nearby gates. A woman yelled, "She didn't even do anything!" Naomi remained silent for a moment, her head held high even as Maddox forced her arms behind her. She didn't resist. Her breathing was slow, measured. She glanced sideways at the growing crowd, then looked over her shoulder at Maddox. Her voice, though soft, was unmissable. "This won't end the way you think." Delaney stood off to the side, expression unreadable, eyes darting between Naomi, Maddox, and the crowd. He could feel it. Something had shifted. The tone, the energy. This wasn't an ordinary incident anymore. Maddox didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He shoved Naomi forward. "Let's move," he barked. Naomi stumbled slightly but regained her posture instantly. She walked forward on her own terms, refusing to be dragged. As they escorted her away from Gate B10, passengers parted to make space, but not in silence. The corridor filled with the buzz of protest, phone cameras following every movement. "That's wrong." A man shouted, "File!" A complaint. A woman said, "Already posting live footage to social media?" Delaney trailed behind, trying to ignore the rising tide of public reaction. He glanced up once. There were already airport staff talking into radios, motioning toward security cameras, whispering. Still, no one stopped them. Maddox marched Naomi through the concourse, past coffee stands, baggage kiosks, and families frozen mid-step. A child asked, "Why is she in handcuffs?" No one had an answer. Naomi didn't speak during the walk. She counted her steps instead, noting the positions of every camera. She read the name tags of employees, clocked every directional sign, memorized the path as though she were building a case in real time. To her, this wasn't an arrest. It was evidence collection. They reached the restricted zone entrance. An officer scanned a badge and a door buzzed open. Naomi was led down a narrower corridor, plain walls, bright lights, tiled floors. Maddox tightened his grip again. "Try anything and you'll regret it." "I already do," Naomi said, her voice low, not in fear but in condemnation. No reply. They entered a small holding area, a stark room with a metal bench bolted to the wall, a stainless steel desk, and a half-asleep officer behind a glass window. A keypad beeped as Delaney entered a code. The internal precinct was quiet, sterile, and completely detached from the chaos outside. Naomi was guided to the center of the room. Maddox removed the cuffs with a harsh twist. Sitcho didn't. She adjusted her sleeves slowly, examining the red indentations on her wrists with clinical detachment. "Did you even check my ID before doing this?" she asked. Delaney looked away. Maddox sneered. "You think you're special? I think you're in trouble," she said plainly. Delaney cleared his throat. "Let's get this over with. Book her for obstruction." Naomi turned to him. "On what basis?" You interfered with the security investigation. There was no investigation. There was an accusation, one you acted on without confirmation, without evidence, without protocol. Enough, Maddox snapped. Naomi finally sat on the bench, crossing her legs calmly. You never asked who I was. Not really, Maddox scoffed. We saw your ID. Doesn't make you exempt. You looked at a name, she said. But you didn't look. The door opened. A younger officer stepped in with a clipboard. Do you want her processed now? Maddox nodded. Naomi didn't flinch. What's your procedure for verifying detainee identity? The officer paused, caught off guard. Delaney interjected. She's already been identified. No, Naomi said. You confirmed a name, not an occupation, not a background check, not a status review. The room fell still for a beat. Naomi reached into her memory, pulling up the exact phrase from federal policy. Section 9.123 of TSA Law Enforcement Interaction Protocol requires officers to verify all identifying credentials if the subject is nonviolent and cooperative prior to escalation. Delaney said nothing. Maddox laughed nervously. Lady, you can recite all the legal codes you want. You're still in a holding room. Naomi stood. And you're still unaware of who you just put cuffs on? The young officer with the clipboard glanced between them, now visibly confused. Naomi's voice was calm, steady, unmistakably authoritative. You should have asked. The small processing room at the airport precinct was quiet, save for the soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The air was still, too still for a room that had just seen an unnecessary arrest. Naomi Ellis sat on the bench, back straight, eyes forward. Her wrists still bore faint red marks, and her calm presence was beginning to feel less like submission and more like strategy. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't resisted. And yet the silence she carried had begun to feel louder than the shouts from the gate. Across the room, Officer Maddox paced in short, tight strides. Officer Delaney leaned on a desk, arms folded, staring at nothing. Neither man spoke to the other. Tension now hung between them, not against Naomi but within themselves. Something about how she carried herself had unsettled them. The younger desk officer tapped at a keyboard, inputting basic information. Full name? He asked, not looking up. Naomi Ellis, she said. Date of birth? She answered without hesitation. The officer nodded slightly and kept typing. Occupation? Naomi didn't blink. She spoke clearly, calmly, as if announcing a courtroom verdict. I am Chief Justice Naomi Ellis, United States Court of Appeals. The typing stopped. The desk officer's hands froze mid-keystroke. His head turned toward her slowly. He blinked twice, processing what he had just heard. Delaney straightened slightly. Maddox stopped pacing. The officer repeated, almost disbelieving, Chief Justice? Yes, Naomi said. I am the Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Delaney's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face paled. His jaw shifted slightly, but he was suddenly very still. Maddox looked at her like she had just detonated a bomb in the room. What did you say? Naomi turned to him fully now. You heard me? The younger officer at the desk stumbled for his mouse, then clicked into a federal database window. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. I just need to verify that. You'll find it under the Judicial Appointments section, Naomi said. He nodded too quickly and began typing furiously. Delaney finally spoke, voice flat and hollow. This is some kind of misunderstanding. Naomi's gaze didn't soften. You've had multiple opportunities to ask the right questions. You made assumptions. You acted without cause. You escalated without reason. Maddox took a step back as if the distance might somehow fix what had just been broken. The desk officer's screen pinged once. His eyes scanned the result. Then they widened. He turned the monitor slightly, just enough for Delaney to see Naomi's federal profile filled the screen. A professional headshot. Judicial seal. Title Chief Justice of the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Delaney stumbled back a step, his hand knocking over a stack of folders on the desk behind him. Maddox's breath turned shallow. No way. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. Yes, way. Nobody moved for a full 10 seconds. Delaney rubbed his forehead, suddenly drenched in sweat. You didn't ask, Naomi cut in. You didn't check. You didn't pause long enough to treat me like a citizen, let alone a professional. The desk officer cleared his throat but said nothing. Maddox looked like he'd swallowed gravel. This is bad. Naomi stood, slowly, with purpose. Her voice never rose above conversation level. You handcuffed a sitting federal judge based solely on the word of a single civilian and an unverified complaint. Delaney looked at the monitor again, as if hoping it would change. You detained me without probable cause, denied me access to my phone, and failed to perform the basic verification required under TSA and federal engagement protocols. Maddox opened his mouth again, but Naomi raised a finger. You put your hands on me without justification, she said to him. That alone constitutes assault under color of law. Maddox took another step back. Delaney tried. We can explain this. No, Naomi replied. You'll have the opportunity to explain to the authorities who now have jurisdiction over your actions. The words landed like steel. Naomi turned to the desk officer. Please retrieve the number for the U.S. Marshals Service. Washington Field Office. He nodded immediately and picked up the landline phone on the desk. I also need to speak with the Chief of Airport Security, the station supervisor, and the federal judiciary's security liaison, she added. I'll call them now, the officer stammered. Naomi didn't sit again. She remained standing, her hands still calmly folded in front of her. Delaney looked like he might be sick. Judge Ellis, you can save the apologies for your statement, she said. Maddox was now seated against the wall, staring at the floor. The phone on the desk rang. The officer picked it up, listened, then looked at Naomi. It's the airport police chief, he said, barely above a whisper. Good, Naomi said. Tell him the Chief Justice would like to speak. Now Naomi Ellis stood tall in the center of the processing room. No longer just a passenger, no longer just a detainee. Her voice was steady, her tone crisp, and every word carried the unmistakable cadence of judicial command. First, remove the restraints from that bench, she said, nodding toward the set of unused cuffs still lying open near the wall, and have them placed in an evidence bag. I want them logged with timestamp and chain of custody. The younger officer at the desk, still holding the receiver, froze. Then he nodded quickly, scribbling notes on a notepad. Naomi didn't stop. Get me a transcript of the arrest record as written so far, unedited. That includes all previous incident reports, audio dispatch logs, and any internal communications referencing me by name or physical description. Delaney leaned against the desk, his face drained of color. Maddox had retreated to the far corner of the room, jaw clenched but silent. She turned to them without raising her voice. Effective immediately, both of you are to cease verbal or physical interaction with me unless in the presence of your direct supervisor or legal counsel. Delaney opened his mouth, but she held up a single hand. Don't speak. Don't rationalize. Don't plead. The officer behind the desk handed her the receiver. Chief of Airport Police is on the line. Naomi took it with grace. This is Chief Justice Naomi Ellis, she began. Yes, I'm currently at your precinct, where I was unlawfully detained by 2 of your officers. I am invoking federal protocol for judicial breach. You are to report to this location in person immediately. Bring your deputy chief and legal counsel. She paused to listen, her expression No explanation is acceptable over the phone. Bring your badge and ID. I will verify them myself. She hung up and handed the phone back without fanfare. Now connect me to the Washington Field Office of the U.S. Marshals Service, she said. The officer looked nervous, but followed instructions, pressing buttons on the secure line. The room was silent except for the quiet clicks of the keypad. When the line connected, Naomi introduced herself again. This is Chief Justice Naomi Ellis. Badge verification code Alpha 741 Capital. I'm requesting immediate deployment of judicial protection personnel to Logan International Airport. Code 6-level priority breach. Location, internal precinct. 2 airport officers in violation of Title 18, Section 242, and possibly Section 241. Another pause. Then, yes, I'll remain on site. I expect arrival within 20 minutes. She replaced the receiver gently. Delaney cleared his throat. Your Honor. Naomi turned toward him slowly. Did I grant permission to speak? Delaney looked down. Naomi glanced back at the officer at the desk. Now, place a call to the Federal Judiciary Liaison Office. Use the emergency contact here. Inform them I've invoked Article 3 judicial protection under emergency status. Provide them with my court district and exact location. The young man's hands trembled slightly as he dialed. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. Naomi returned her attention to her cuffs. I also want photographs of the marks on my wrists taken under proper evidence lighting. You will log them as part of an assault report per U.S. Marshal's procedure. She turned back to Maddox. If either of you deletes or alters a single second of body cam or security footage, I'll personally see to it that obstruction of justice is added to the list of charges. Maddox didn't move. His mouth was tight. His stare burned into the floor. The room, once sterile and static, now pulsed with bureaucratic urgency. Phones rang. Officers whispered. Doors opened and closed with a frequency that suggested something much bigger was unfolding beyond the four walls. Naomi wasn't angry. She was efficient. Every instruction she gave was executed with judicial authority, rooted in federal law, backed by decades of courtroom experience, and enforced through layers of legal channels designed for exactly this type of emergency. A second officer entered with a clipboard. Ma'am, I'm here to document your injuries for the assault report. Naomi stepped aside, pulling back her sleeve. Red marks circled both wrists. The officer began photographing the evidence under proper lighting, zooming in on every abrasion. Once finished, Naomi nodded once. Thank you, Delaney, who had remained in the corner like a statue, finally spoke, voice hoarse. We didn't know. We weren't told who you were. Naomi met his eyes. You didn't ask. There was no reply. The officer at the desk spoke into his handset again. Yes, sir, she's still here. Yes, confirmed, all secure? He looked at Naomi. U.S. Marshals are inbound? ETA, 12 minutes. Naomi nodded. I'll speak with them first. She turned and walked toward the far side of the room, placing herself squarely between the two officers who had detained her and the desk where decisions were now being logged in real time. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. She had seized control of the room, not through intimidation, but through expertise, through knowledge, through law. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed backup. She had used the very system they thought they controlled and turned it against them with surgical precision. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within an hour, Logan International Airport had become the center of a rapidly growing firestorm, not just inside the precinct, but far beyond it. The ripple had become a wave. First came the black SUV. The U.S. Marshals Service arrived through a side entrance, bypassing public areas to avoid further disruption. 4 agents, suited and expressionless, entered the precinct with quiet urgency. Their lead identified himself, showed his badge to the young officer at the desk, and requested immediate access to Chief Justice Naomi Elishi, stood as they approached. No introduction was needed. They already knew exactly who she was. Chief Justice, the lead agent said, bowing his head slightly. We're here to assume responsibility for your protection and initiate a federal inquiry. Good, Naomi said. You're going to need to secure every data source connected to this room. I want copies of all surveillance footage, body cams, audio feeds, and digital communications from the past 3 hours, isolated, archived, and preserved under federal jurisdiction. We've already started, the agent replied. A second group arrived minutes later, this time escorted by airport management. At the center was the airport police chief, flanked by the deputy chief and 2 legal advisors. Their expressions were grave. The moment he stepped into the room and saw Naomi, he froze. His mouth opened slightly, recognition dawning far too late. Chief Justice Ellis, he said, I had no idea. Save it, she interrupted. I've already provided a full preliminary statement. You'll receive it in writing, along with a list of formal charges being submitted to the Department of Justice. The police chief's shoulders sank. Of course, standing beside her now were not just marshals, but officials from the federal judiciary's security division, staff who had flown in on an emergency transport flight from D.C. The courtroom wasn't in session, but justice was already being served. Naomi's voice remained composed as she turned to the officials. The complaint originated at Gate B10. A civilian claimed to feel unsafe, offered no credible threat indicators, and misrepresented my behavior. The responding officers failed to verify her story, failed to review security footage, and failed to validate my identity despite proper documentation. She gestured toward a printed set of documents one of the marshals had retrieved from the precinct printer. Here is the timeline of the incident, cross-referenced with airport CCTV and statements from bystanders. You'll find video from at least 3 passengers showing clear verbal aggression, wrongful detention, and physical contact without justification. A court liaison stepped forward with a sealed folder. We've compiled verified transcripts from the gate agent, 3 travelers, and 1 airline employee. All corroborate the judge's account. The airport police chief swallowed hard. His legal counsel whispered something in his ear, but he waved it off. He turned to his 2 officers, Delaney and Maddox, who stood stiff, pale, and silent in the corner. "Remove your weapons," he said. Neither man moved. "I said remove your weapons. And your badges." Delaney unholstered his firearm first, then his badge. He placed them gently on the desk. Maddox followed slowly, the sound of his gun hitting the desk loud in the otherwise quiet room. "You are suspended pending full investigation," the chief continued. "Effective immediately. You will not remain on these premises. You will leave under escort." 2 internal affairs officers stepped forward, collecting their gear. Neither Delaney nor Maddox protested. There was nothing left to say. The chief turned back to Naomi. "I'll be issuing a formal apology on behalf of airport security within the hour." "Don't," she said flatly. "Save it for court." He nodded once, humiliated. Outside the room, news had already begun to spread. The first video hit social media just after Naomi had been escorted to the precinct. Footage captured by a teenage passenger at Gate B10. Within minutes, it was on Twitter. By the time the marshals arrived, it had already surpassed 50,000 views. The caption read, "This woman got handcuffed in business class. Turns out she's a federal judge. Watch what happens." Cable news producers latched onto it instantly. Within an hour, Naomi's name trended nationally. Semitators argued over the implications. A federal judge, a wrongful arrest, a failure in protocol, racial profiling, abuse of power. The footage spoke for itself. Her calm voice, Maddox's aggression, Delaney's smirks. The moment the cuffs were snapped on her wrists back inside the precinct, the marshals took over full evidence collection. Computers were accessed, drives copied, officer logs archived. Naomi reviewed every step, signing off on chain of custody forms and dictating redaction guidelines for any judicially privileged information. One of the marshals turned to her. "Would you like us to prepare the charges for referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office?" "Yes," Naomi said. "Start with civil rights violations under color of law." A liaison from the federal court system took notes beside her. "We'll also notify the Judicial Ethics Committee in case any of this impacts public trust." "It already has," Naomi replied. "Now we respond accordingly." The police chief approached again, this time more cautiously. "If there's anything else we can do." "There is," Naomi said. "Locate the civilian who made the initial false report." The chief blinked. "The passenger?" Naomi turned her head slightly. "Yes, Carla Whitman. I want her name officially logged, her statement preserved, and her boarding status verified." The chief's jaw tightened. "Understood. We'll track her immediately." Naomi returned to the table of evidence folders. "Make sure it's done. She won't walk away from this untouched." Carla Whitman was halfway through a glass of complimentary champagne in her first-class seat when the flight attendant returned, smiling politely but with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. "Miss Whitman," the attendant said gently, "we've received a request from ground security. They'd like you to deplane briefly before departure." Carla blinked. "Excuse me?" "There's a matter that needs clarification," the attendant continued. "They said it won't take long." Passengers nearby turned to glance. Carla straightened in her seat. "What kind of matter?" "I'm not sure, ma'am, but I was asked to inform you it's mandatory." Carla hesitated for a second too long, then, clutching her handbag, she stood. Fine, but this had better be quick. She followed the attendant down the aisle, past rows of curious eyes. At the aircraft door, 2 plainclothes security agents waited at the jet bridge. One of them flashed a badge. Carla Whitman? He asked. Yes. We're with Airport Security Investigations. Please come with us. What is this about? We'll explain at the security office. She huffed, but complied. The champagne buzz in her head dulled fast. Her steps grew heavier with each stride. In a private conference room just beyond the terminal, she was seated, handed a bottle of water, and left to wait. A digital clock ticked on the wall. Her fingers drummed against her bag. Something felt wrong, off, bigger than she had expected. A door opened. A federal officer stepped inside with 2 folders and a laptop. He sat down, opened the top file, and looked at her, Ms. Whitman, I'm Investigator Cole with the U.S. Department of Justice. You are currently under preliminary review for submitting a false report to airport authorities that contributed to the wrongful detention of a federal official. Carla blinked. What? Specifically, a false and racially biased claim made at Gate B10, resulting in the arrest of Chief Justice Naomi Ellis. The room tilted. Carla gripped the sides of her chair. Chief who? Naomi Ellis, Cole repeated. Chief Justice of the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. The woman you accused of acting suspiciously. I didn't, Carla started, then stopped. Cole opened the laptop. On the screen was a paused frame of her pointing directly at Naomi. The timestamp and gate information were clear. This was recorded by the gate surveillance system. We also have audio from the gate agent and 3 passengers' cell phone recordings. Carla stared at the screen, mouth dry. Carla pressed play. Her voice came through, crisp and unmistakable. She doesn't belong here. Check her papers. The playback stopped. Carla swallowed hard. Cole continued. We are also reviewing the situation under the lens of 18 U.S. Code SS 1001, false statements within jurisdiction of the federal government, and 42 U.S. Code SS 1985, conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. This is insane, Carla muttered. I didn't conspire with anyone. You knowingly filed a baseless accusation, Cole said calmly. That accusation triggered an incident that's now under federal investigation. The 2 officers involved have already been suspended. You are the origin point of this event. Carla began to panic. I didn't know who she was. I was just uncomfortable. That's not illegal. It's not illegal to feel uncomfortable, Cole replied. It's illegal to weaponize that discomfort against someone without evidence, especially when it results in abuse of authority. I didn't tell them to arrest her. No, Cole said, but you created the opportunity, and you did it by suggesting she didn't belong. Carla's voice turned pleading. This is a misunderstanding. Cole placed a legal document in front of her. You're being issued a formal notice of inquiry. You'll be expected to appear for a recorded interview and may face civil and criminal liability, pending the results of our investigation. Her eyes scanned the paper. Legal terms blurred into each other. If you wish to cooperate, Cole said, you can begin by signing that notice and submitting a sworn statement. It will be reviewed before any formal charges are filed. Carla didn't move. Ma'am, this is your chance to show that you're willing to take responsibility, Cole added. After several long seconds, she picked up the pen and signed. Cole stood. We'll contact you soon. You're free to leave the airport for now, but I recommend you speak with legal counsel. She nodded, speechless. The door shut behind him. Carla sat alone, shaking. By the time she returned to the main terminal, her flight had departed. But that was the least of her problems. Later that evening, her name hit the news cycle, not front and center yet, but embedded in the investigative reports now being circulated by legal analysts. The woman who triggered the encounter. The one whose complaint had no basis. Social media lit up. Some headlines asked, "Who is Carla Whitman?" Others said, "Passenger behind false complaint." Under federal scrutiny, photos surfaced. Her social profiles were locked down within hours, but screenshots had already spread. The court of public opinion was assembling. And for once, Carla was the one being judged. The federal charges came faster than most expected. Just 72 hours after the incident at Logan International, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts filed formal criminal indictments against former officers Mark Delaney and Tyler Maddox. Their suspensions were upgraded to terminations. Their access to police systems, weapons, and precinct facilities was revoked. Their legal status had shifted. No longer enforcers of the law, but defendants standing against it. The charges were steep, serious, and unflinching. Count 1. Deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S. Code SS 242. Count 2. False arrest and unlawful detention. Count 3. Excessive use of force. Count 4. Conspiracy to violate civil rights. 42 SS 1985. Delaney was charged on all counts. Maddox faced additional charges due to his direct physical involvement in the unlawful handcuffing. The indictment documents were made public by noon. Legal analysts flooded the airwaves. Clips of the arrest circulated in split screen, alongside screenshots of the federal filings. News anchors used phrases like textbook abuse of authority and failure of procedural oversight, but the evidence did most of the talking. The officer's own body cam footage left no room for interpretation. Maddox's tone, Delaney's silence, the refusal to follow standard procedure. Naomi's voice, clear, lawful, composed, contrasted with the condescending and threatening behavior of the officers. Airport security camera angles further validated her timeline, showing the moment of approach, the baseless questioning, and the exact instant Maddox slapped the cuffs on her wrists. The videos even captured bystanders reacting, gasping, and filming with their own phones. And then there were the live streams. 2 separate travelers had uploaded videos to Instagram and TikTok, unedited, unfiltered, real-time. One was angled directly at Naomi's calm demeanor while Maddox shouted in her face. The other showed the crowd yelling in protest as she was led away. Combined, the footage had amassed over 15 million views by the time the indictment was filed. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division issued a statement. The Department of Justice will not tolerate law enforcement actions that violate constitutional protections. Public officials are bound to the highest standards of conduct, especially when armed with the authority to detain and arrest. In this case, clear evidence supports a criminal violation of those responsibilities. Neither Delaney nor Maddox made public statements. Their legal teams, however, moved quickly to request separate trials. Delaney's attorney pushed for a plea deal, citing his client's failure to intervene rather than direct involvement. Maddox's lawyer, in contrast, attempted to reframe the entire event as a tense misunderstanding that had escalated beyond control. The judge overseeing the arraignment denied bail initially, then granted conditional release under strict monitoring, including surrender of passports, daily check-ins, and no-contact orders involving the federal judiciary. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs. Silence is not safety. Cuffs for her equals prison for them. Power doesn't excuse prejudice. Civil rights organizations filed amici briefs urging maximum penalties. Law students and bar associations issued open letters supporting the prosecution. Law professors across the country added the case to syllabi overnight. In police departments nationwide, emails circulated with attached clips and cautionary memos. This is what happens when protocol is ignored. The legal implications stretched beyond the courtroom. Mayors, police chiefs, and city attorneys began re-examining their own local use of force guidelines. Several jurisdictions accelerated long-stalled body cam review policies. Training academies requested new modules on unconscious bias, civil liberty protections, and escalation control. The dominoes had started to fall. Inside the legal community, the indictment triggered a more personal reckoning. Judges, both state and federal, watched the footage not as bystanders but with the uneasy awareness that it could have been any of them. Courtroom authority had not protected Naomi in that terminal. A robe didn't matter when the badge misread the person. Still, the criminal prosecution had one major hurdle ahead: a federal trial. The U.S. District Court scheduled pretrial hearings within 3 weeks. The courtroom would be open to media with limited seating for the public. The government would present evidence first. Witnesses would include airport personnel, passengers, and digital forensics experts. But the most anticipated testimony wouldn't come from a staffer. It would come from the woman in the gray blazer who'd said only one thing as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. "This won't end the way you think." The courtroom was packed. It wasn't the kind of trial that came and went quietly. The proceedings were federal, the charges severe, and the eyes of the nation firmly fixed on what had started as a simple security call and erupted into a constitutional reckoning. Chief Justice Naomi Ellis entered through a side hallway under U.S. Marshal escort. Though she was not there as a judge today, the entire room instinctively straightened as she walked in. Her composure remained intact. Her face gave nothing away. The prosecution called her first chief, Justice Ellis. "Please take the stand." She stepped up and placed her hand on the Bible without hesitation. Sworn in, seated, and ready, she scanned the room once, meeting the gaze of no one in particular, but ensuring no one would forget what they were about to hear. The lead prosecutor approached. "Your Honor, can you recount, in your own words, what occurred on the afternoon of May 5th at Logan International Airport?" Naomi nodded once. "Yes." She began without theatrics, no dramatization, just facts, articulated with the clarity of someone who knew precisely how a courtroom functioned and what it demanded. She described the boarding area, her position in line, the approach of the officers, the nature of their questioning, and her calm attempts to assert her legal rights. The jury listened in silence. The prosecution introduced evidence, Exhibit 7A, airport gate surveillance footage. The courtroom lights dimmed. A large screen blinked to life, showing Naomi standing at the front of the business class line, reviewing documents on her tablet. The video played silently, but the stillness in the room made it feel louder than any sound. The footage showed officers Delaney and Maddox approaching. It showed Naomi stepping aside. It showed Maddox gesturing aggressively, Naomi's calm expression, the snap of the cuffs, the shift in passenger body language, the phones rising, the protest. When the footage ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Then came the body cam video. The footage was darker, more intimate. Voices were clear. "I'm exercising my rights. You think you're clever? Remove your phone. You'll regret this." Maddox's tone filled the courtroom. Sharp, escalating, laced with contempt. The camera caught the angle of his hand on her arm, the cuffs, the pressure. Maddox, seated at the defense table, dropped his head. His shoulders tensed. He rubbed his palms together and avoided looking at the screen. Delaney didn't move at all. The prosecution continued. Exhibit 12B, live stream footage from passenger's cell phone. The angle shifted, more chaotic handheld, Naomi in profile. Maddox's voice still present. Delaney's silence, his refusal to intervene. Background voices. "She didn't do anything," and "This is wrong." The jury was motionless. When the final clip ended, the lights came back up. Naomi looked directly at the prosecutor. "What I experienced was not a misunderstanding. It was targeted, unjustified, and avoidable. If I had not held the position I do, I'd have been forgotten by now, but I am here not just for myself. I'm here because millions of others wouldn't get this chance." The defense declined to cross-examine. Maddox sat slumped, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. His face was wet. He wiped at his eyes, but didn't lift his head. Delaney sat upright but rigid, staring at the edge of the defense table as though he were trying to will it to disappear. The judge adjourned for the day. As Naomi stepped down, the courtroom remained silent. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she exited, every step steady, measured, final. The final day of the trial drew the largest crowd yet. By now, the courthouse had become a public stage for a case that had captured national attention. Every news outlet had a correspondent stationed outside. Every camera pointed toward the double doors where justice would soon be announced, not for the powerful, but for those who had once held power and used it recklessly. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The jury had reached a verdict the evening before. Now, all that remained was for it to be read aloud and entered into history. Judge Karen Roth, a respected federal judge with over 2 decades on the bench, presided over the case. She entered in silence, robe sweeping, eyes steady. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The room stood. "You may be seated." Judge Roth looked directly at the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman said. A folded paper was handed over. Roth opened it and read silently for a few seconds. Then, with no hesitation, she spoke. "In the matter of United States v. Delaney and Maddox on the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, the jury finds the defendants guilty," and neither defendant moved. "On the charge of unlawful detention, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty." A collective hush fell over the courtroom. No cheers, no gasps, just the quiet weight of consequences finally landing. Maddox lowered his head again, staring into his lap. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't respond. Delaney looked forward, jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Judge Roth turned to the bench, pulled a second folder from beneath her case notes, and opened it. "These are serious convictions," she said. "And while this court recognizes that neither defendant had prior criminal records, the nature of these offenses, committed while in uniform, demands accountability without leniency." She looked at each man individually. "You, Officer Maddox, used your position not to protect but to intimidate. You escalated a peaceful situation into violence and humiliation. You ignored your duty and you betrayed your oath." Maddox didn't look up. "You, Officer Delaney, allowed it to happen. You stood in silence while a colleague violated protocol, civil rights, and basic decency. Inaction can be just as damning as aggression, and in this case it was." Delaney blinked slowly but remained silent. Judge Roth closed the folder. "For these reasons, and considering the impact of your actions on a federal official, public trust in law enforcement, and the safety of those disproportionately affected by racial profiling, this court sentences you both to 4 years in federal prison." A murmur rippled through the gallery. 4 years each," she repeated, "without parole, effective immediately." The bailiff stepped forward. Judge Roth turned to the courtroom audience and the cameras that would soon echo her words to millions. "This country will not tolerate racism hiding in uniform." Then she stood and exited the bench. The room remained still. Bailiffs handcuffed both men without resistance. Maddox's face was red, his eyes glassy, but he didn't speak. Delaney didn't react at all. The fall from authority to inmate was swift and silent. As the 2 former officers were led from the courtroom, Chief Justice Naomi Ellis, seated in the second row with her arms folded, didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She only watched. Outside, press scrambled to report the sentencing in real time. Across the country, headlines broke within minutes. "Guilty officers sentenced in Judge Ellis Airport arrest. Justice for the Chief Justice. Federal verdict sends strong message. System bends, but doesn't break. 2 officers jailed for racially motivated abuse." In law schools, the case was already being studied. In police academies, it was being added to training. In newsrooms, it became a symbol of accountability, of the law's reach, of the moment when a badge no longer protected those who misused it. The Ellis case was now part of national legal history. But the story wasn't finished yet. Carla Whitman had built her public image over 3 decades. She was a prominent figure on several corporate boards, a regular at charity galas, and a frequent donor to political campaigns. Her name had appeared in annual lists of women of influence, and she had even been honored with a regional award for philanthropy just 6 months earlier. But none of that mattered now. The civil lawsuit filed by Chief Justice Naomi Ellis against Carla moved quickly. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a full-scale legal assault. The charges: defamation, malicious reporting, false public statements, and civil conspiracy. The documents were served to Carla's legal counsel within 10 days of the criminal trial's conclusion. Her attorneys immediately began negotiating. They knew the evidence was insurmountable. Surveillance footage, audio recordings, sworn witness statements, all pointed to one truth. Carla had instigated an unjustifiable situation with racially charged intent. Going to trial would mean exposing her conduct to the public record in minute, excruciating detail. The risk was unacceptable. After 2 rounds of confidential settlement talks, Carla agreed to a deal. She would pay $450,000, 0 cents, in damages to Naomi Ellis, and issue a written acknowledgement of responsibility to be published through legal channels and entered into the official court record. No cameras, no jury, no televised admission of guilt. It wasn't an apology, but it was submission. Naomi signed off on the settlement. Carla's reputation, however, did not survive. The terms of the agreement didn't bar public reporting. The moment court filings became accessible, major outlets picked them up. Her name appeared in headlines nationwide. Woman behind false claim pays the price. Carla Whitman reaches settlement in civil suit with federal judge. $450, 0 cents, the cost of a lie. In the span of 2 weeks, she was removed from the board of Whitman & Brooks, a real estate conglomerate co-founded by her late husband. The press release cited recent events incompatible with the company's core values. Within days, the charities followed suit. Her name vanished from the leadership page of the Urban Literacy Foundation. An annual arts gala replaced her on its honorary chair list. A scholarship fund she had personally funded for over a decade quietly ended its association. The message was consistent. She was no longer welcome behind closed doors. Carla's legal team tried to contain the damage. They advised her to go offline, restrict access to her social media, and decline all interviews. A public statement would only make it worse. Her family distanced themselves, especially her adult children, 2 of whom held positions in public-facing industries. At home, Carla found herself alone in a house that once hosted lavish dinners and fundraiser receptions. The silence was heavy. Her inbox overflowed not with invitations, but cancellations. The world she'd spent a lifetime curating had collapsed. She considered leaving the country briefly, but even that seemed futile. A former colleague attempted to defend her in an online op-ed claiming we shouldn't destroy someone's life over a single mistake. The backlash was immediate. Comments flooded in, calling out the minimization of racism, the privilege in play, and the harm done to countless people whose lives weren't protected by judicial titles. No other publication accepted op-eds on her behalf after that. The settlement didn't include non-disparagement clauses. Naomi hadn't asked for silence, only accountability, and the consequences rippled beyond Carla herself. Corporate boardrooms discussed internal bias screening processes. Conferences on legal ethics added new sessions about the role of civilian complaints and misuse of law enforcement. Diversity workshops cited the Ellis case by name. Carla's actions became a cautionary tale across multiple industries. Law firms used her name as shorthand for liability. "Don't pull a Carla," one compliance director was heard saying during a training. In the span of 4 months, Carla went from respected elite to living case study. At one point, she wrote a private letter to Naomi through her attorneys, expressing regret for the unintended harm. The letter never received a reply. Naomi had no need for personal closure. The record spoke for itself. And for Carla, there was no escape from the verdict rendered by society, even if no judge had delivered it in open court. The case of Chief Justice Naomi Ellis didn't just end with convictions and settlements. It cracked open a national conversation that institutions could no longer avoid. Within weeks of the trial's conclusion, members of Congress began calling for formal reviews of airport security procedures. What had once been seen as standard discretion was now under a harsh spotlight, illuminating deep flaws in how authority was exercised, and who it was exercised against. The Department of Justice moved first. A memorandum was issued to all federally funded law enforcement agencies, requiring immediate review of passenger screening and response protocols in public transportation hubs. Within 30 days, every major airport in the country was ordered to submit documentation on how passenger complaints were received, assessed, and escalated. Simultaneously, the DOJ rolled out a new policy directive, mandatory body-worn camera activation for all airport-based officers during passenger interactions. The footage would be encrypted and uploaded to a federal database for quarterly audits. The order came with sharp language. Failure to document interactions undermines public trust and increases liability. All officers are expected to conduct their duties with transparency, accountability, and procedural fairness. Training requirements were overhauled next. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center's FLETC implemented a comprehensive anti-BS curriculum, including situational exercises based on the Ellis incident. Officers would now be required to complete annual certifications in de-escalation, civil rights awareness, and implicit bias recognition. The program wasn't optional. It became a prerequisite for assignment to any federal transit facility. Airports responded quickly. Signage changed. Protocols changed. Gate agents received new scripts for addressing passenger concerns, now with an emphasis on verifying threats before contacting law enforcement. Even the Transportation Security Administration issued an internal revision. Agents were briefed on how to identify racially motivated complaints, masked as suspicion. Whistleblower protections were reinforced, encouraging staff to report patterns of profiling. In congressional hearings, the Ellis case was cited by name. One senator said, "We watched in real time what happens when unchecked bias intersects with unchecked authority. This is no longer theoretical." Civil rights groups pushed the momentum further. The ACLU and NAACP Legal Defense Fund partnered with federal agencies to offer legal training to frontline officers. New York, California, and Illinois passed state-level legislation requiring public safety agencies to adopt DOJ-aligned reform measures. Airports in Europe and Canada reached out to American counterparts, requesting access to the training modules introduced post-ELIS. It had become more than a scandal. It was now a turning point. Media coverage shifted from outrage to action. Investigative journalists ran exposés on previous airport complaints that had been dismissed or never recorded. In response, the DOJ established a federal passenger rights reporting portal where travelers could submit complaints directly to the Civil Rights Division for review. The tool launched with over 12,000 submissions in the first week. Law schools analyzed the Ellis litigation as a model for successful, systemic accountability. Lectures explored how one incident, properly documented and litigated, could set precedent for public policy reform without requiring legislation from above. Within 6 months, a DOJ task force released an interim report showing measurable impact. Complaints of racial profiling at U.S. airports had dropped 17%. Disciplinary action against officers increased 31%. Not due to worse behavior, but better documentation. More incidents were now being captured, reported, and addressed. Behind the numbers were real changes. Passengers no longer dragged out of line without verification. Officers pausing before escalation. Supervisors intervening earlier. Lines of accountability clearly marked and enforced. Still, not everyone welcomed the changes. Police unions criticized the training mandates, calling them unnecessary constraints on judgment. A few pundits argued that Ellis's position had given her an advantage others wouldn't have had, but those arguments gained little traction because at the center of it all was video of a calm woman in a business suit being handcuffed without cause. Video of a voice quoting federal statutes while 2 officers ignored them. Video of a system failing and then being forced to correct itself. It was no longer about status. It was about proof, and Naomi's name had become inseparable from reform. By the end of the year, the DOJ released a digital handbook titled Procedural Integrity in Public Enforcement: Lessons from the Ellis Case. It was distributed to every federal agency and adopted by several private security contractors as well. The story had echoed from courtrooms to classrooms, from policy rooms to patrol briefings. Yet, for all the impact, one truth became clear: change had not come from within the system. It had come because someone had refused to accept that the system was working as intended, and that someone was Naomi Ellis. In the aftermath of the landmark trial, Chief Justice Naomi Ellis's name transcended her judicial title, becoming emblematic of justice and resilience in the 21st century. Esteemed legal institutions across the nation honored her contributions. The American Bar Association awarded her the Integrity Award for her outstanding efforts in safeguarding civil rights. Harvard Law School invited her to deliver the commencement address, where she emphasized the importance of maintaining professional ethics and fairness within the legal system. Additionally, she received the Liberty Bell Award from the National Conference of Bar Presidents, a rare accolade bestowed upon those who uphold justice principles under challenging circumstances. Despite numerous invitations to televised tributes and public ceremonies, Naomi declined many of them. Her decision wasn't rooted in protest or pride, but stemmed from her belief that the moment shouldn't solely focus on her. In a national television interview, she remarked, "This isn't just about one woman at an airport. It's about the millions who lack cameras, courts, or public outrage when their rights are disregarded." Instead of basking in fame, Naomi channeled her energy into action. She collaborated with the Civil Rights Division to establish an independent legal aid network for victims of unlawful detention, discrimination, and racial profiling. The initiative, named Justice Forward, launched with a team of 50 attorneys and volunteers across 5 major cities. Within its first quarter, the program had already undertaken over 130 active cases. Naomi's commitment didn't stop there. She began participating in legal reform conferences nationwide, not as a guest of honor, but as an active contributor. She joined legal think tanks, conducted workshops for young attorneys, and advised federal agencies on judicial conduct policies. At a panel in Chicago, addressing a room full of police academy instructors, she stated, "Teach them that authority isn't a weapon, it's a responsibility. And silence isn't neutral, it's complicity." Naomi consistently maintained her stance, not as a judge behind a bench, but as someone who had experienced the worst misuse of power and transformed it into an unyielding force for good. When questioned about not taking a sabbatical or early retirement, she succinctly replied, "I'm not finished." She recognized that systemic change doesn't occur spontaneously. Policy papers and training modules alone weren't sufficient. Genuine reform necessitated continuous vigilance, real-life narratives, and individuals willing to re-enter the fray even after enduring its challenges. Naomi visited universities, engaging not only with law students but also with undergraduates, first-generation scholars, and students of color, who often questioned their place within institutions shaped by power and tradition. "You belong in every courtroom," she told a packed auditorium, "not just as defendants, not just as observers, as defenders, as decision-makers, as those who write the rules, not just follow them." A video clip from that event circulated widely, with one quote gaining particular traction. "They handcuffed me because they didn't ask who I was. I'm working to ensure they never forget who we are." This moment was reprinted on magazine covers, T-shirts, and law review journals. It became a mantra in classrooms and advocacy centers. Yet, Naomi remained focused. She declined book deals and documentary offers. When a political action committee offered to fund a potential Senate run, she didn't even return the call. "I'm not here to run for office. I'm here to make the office mean something." Behind the scenes, she continued to support families affected by similar incidents. She arranged pro bono representation, funded temporary housing for those thrust into poverty due to wrongful arrests, and donated her speaking honorariums to community legal defense initiatives. Her chambers evolved into a hub of activity, not of fame but of function. Clerks who once handled appeals now also reviewed civil rights cases submitted by independent attorneys. Her assistants coordinated with Department of Justice task forces to monitor the progress of national reforms. She understood she couldn't rectify everything, but she also knew that wasn't an excuse to do nothing. At a judiciary summit, a younger judge inquired about her source of energy to persist. Naomi looked at her and said, "Because people are still being ignored. And as long as someone pretends not to see them, I'll be standing right in the way." Her unwavering dedication inspired a new generation of legal professionals. Law schools incorporated her case into their curricula, emphasizing the importance of standing up against systemic injustices. Legal aid organizations saw a surge in volunteers, many citing Naomi's story as their motivation. Community leaders across the country invited her to speak, hoping her words would galvanize local efforts toward justice reform. While she couldn't attend every event, she ensured her message reached as many as possible, often sending recorded messages or participating in virtual discussions. Her influence extended beyond the legal realm. Artists created murals depicting her likeness, symbolizing hope and resilience. Musicians composed songs inspired by her journey, and authors penned essays analyzing the broader implications of her case. Despite the accolades and widespread recognition, Naomi remained grounded. She often credited her team, the legal community, and the countless unnamed individuals who supported her cause. In the courtroom had long been cleared. The gavel's final echo had faded, and the media frenzy had subsided. Yet the resonance of Chief Justice Naomi Ellis's stand against injustice continued to ripple through the nation's conscience. In a quiet studio, devoid of the usual trappings of grandeur, Naomi sat poised before the camera. The setting was minimalist: a single chair, a neutral backdrop, and the soft hum of studio lights. The director signaled the start, and the camera's red light blinked to life. Naomi took a deep breath, her gaze steady and unwavering. "They tried to break me," she began, her voice calm yet imbued with conviction. "Instead, they strengthened my resolve." A moment of silence followed, allowing her words to settle, to permeate the space beyond the lens. The screen gradually faded to black. In stark white letters, a message appeared, based on a fictional story, but inspired by real injustice. The simplicity of the statement belied the complexity of the issues it encapsulated. It served as both a disclaimer and a call to awareness, urging viewers to reflect on the realities that inspired the narrative. As the credits rolled, a montage of real-life figures who had faced and fought against systemic injustice appeared. Activists, legal pioneers, and everyday individuals whose courage had sparked change. The final image lingered, a close-up of Naomi's face, her eyes reflecting a blend of sorrow, strength, and unwavering determination. Justice, she had shown, is not a static ideal, but a living, breathing pursuit, one that requires vigilance, courage, and an unyielding commitment to act. Her story, though fictional, resonated with truths that many recognized, serving as both a mirror and a beacon. In the quiet that followed, viewers were left to ponder their role in the ongoing narrative of justice. Because, as Naomi had demonstrated, justice has no color, no singular face. It is a collective responsibility, a shared journey toward a more equitable world. Stories like the one you've just witnessed don't end when the final line is spoken or the screen fades to black. They linger in conversations, in memory, and most importantly, in the quiet moments when we start to question what we would do if we were in that courtroom, that terminal, or those handcuffs. Chief Justice Naomi Ellis may be a fictional character, but the world that cornered her is not. What happened to her in that airport was dramatized, but it mirrors real headlines, real body cam footage, real names like Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor. Names etched into public consciousness, each followed by pain, protest, and too often, silence. Naomi's story reminded us that even those who hold titles, who sit at the top of the system, are not immune to being reduced to stereotypes by it. Power doesn't always protect you, but conviction, inner strength, legal knowledge, and the courage to speak can turn that moment of injustice into a turning point. She didn't fight back with anger. She didn't crumble under pressure. She asked for badge numbers. She quoted the law. She stood tall, not just for herself, but for everyone watching who had once been told to sit down, be quiet, or wait their turn. In doing so, Naomi did more than win a personal battle. She set off a chain reaction that forced change. One courtroom, one agency, one national conversation at a time. That's the heart of this story. It's not just about a woman wronged. It's about what happens when the system underestimates the wrong person. And that raises the question for each of us: what would you do if you saw something like this unfolding in front of you? Would you speak up or stay silent? The hardest part of confronting injustice is realizing how ordinary it often looks. It doesn't always come with flashing lights or sirens. Sometimes it's a subtle glance, a whispered doubt, a decision made behind a desk. And sometimes it's a uniformed officer convinced he knows more than the truth standing right in front of him. But the moment we name injustice for what it is, it starts to lose power. The moment someone records, challenges, or simply says, "That's not right," they draw a line. We hope this story helped draw one for you, and we hope it left you asking bigger questions about race, authority, truth, and what justice really looks like, because justice isn't passive. It's not a trophy. It's not something handed out only in courtrooms. It's something we build, protect, enforce, and live by. Naomi reminded us that justice doesn't always wear robes or badges. Sometimes it wears doubt, fear, and exhaustion, and still stands tall. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes or stirred something in you, we ask one simple thing: don't let the message stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but challenge. And finally, we want to hear from you. What moment in this story hit you the hardest, and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's start the conversation where it matters most, together. Until next time, remember, justice has no color, but it needs every voice. After returning from the controversial arrest at the airport, Naomi Ellis couldn't stay still. Her office, a spacious room lined with towering bookshelves and walls adorned with accolades, witnessed a different Naomi. The calm, polite demeanor typical of a Chief Justice had been replaced by a burning determination. Naomi began by making calls to close colleagues and social activists she knew. Each call ended with a promise. A meeting would be held immediately to assess the situation and determine the next steps. "We need a concrete plan," Naomi said during the first meeting, held in her office. "Not just to address what happened to me, but to ensure this never happens to anyone else." Inspired by Naomi's resolve, the group began sketching out a national campaign. They decided to focus on 3 key pillars: legal education, policy reform, and increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Naomi knew that many ordinary people didn't fully understand their rights under the law. "We need a widespread education program," she said. "Workshops, online courses, and simple, accessible materials so people can learn how to protect themselves legally." On the policy front, Naomi and her team proposed a new bill called the Justice and Transparency Act. This legislation aimed to increase oversight of law enforcement, including the establishment of an independent review board and requiring body cameras as a mandatory standard for all officers. To enhance transparency, Naomi's team launched a social media campaign using hashtags like Justice and Transparency and Know Your Rights to spread awareness. They also partnered with journalists and documentary filmmakers to create programs highlighting issues of justice and specific cases of abuse. In the weeks that followed, Naomi dedicated much of her time to speaking at events, appearing in television interviews, and writing for major publications. Every speech and article was a call to action, a plea for people to stand up against injustice. The story of the airport incident and Naomi's subsequent actions quickly became a hot topic on social media and in public discussions. People from across the country began sharing their own stories of injustice and abuse of power, further fueling the effort to build a fairer and more transparent society. Despite facing opposition from those whose interests were threatened, Naomi remained undeterred. She and her team continued to push forward, transforming her personal ordeal into a widespread social movement, a fight not just for her justice, but for everyone's. As Naomi Ellis's campaign began to gain significant attention and support, opposing forces also started to mobilize. High-ranking police officials felt threatened by Naomi's push for transparency and accountability. They initiated lobbying efforts to obstruct the Justice and Transparency Act and launched media campaigns aimed at tarnishing Naomi's reputation. During a press conference, several high-ranking police officials publicly criticized Naomi, accusing her of politicizing security issues and undermining trust in the police force. They claimed that the measures Naomi proposed would weaken the police's ability to protect the public. However, the community's reaction was markedly different. Individuals who had been affected by injustice and police abuse began to speak out. They organized peaceful marches, carrying banners with slogans like "Justice and Transparency" and "Naomi Speaks for Me," creating a strong wave of support. National civil rights organizations also began to voice their support, viewing Naomi as a symbol of justice and reform. The issue also started to attract the attention of politicians. Some lawmakers, realizing they could not ignore the strong public sentiment, began to publicly support the Justice and Transparency Act. Naomi was invited to testify at a congressional hearing, where she passionately and eloquently articulated the need for reform. Ultimately, the Justice and Transparency Act was passed with substantial support. Naomi, though exhausted from months of struggle, felt profound joy. She knew that while the fight for justice was far from over, this advancement was a significant victory for all who had ever felt powerless against the system. Naomi Ellis's story is not just one of personal triumph. It is a tale about the power of community, the refusal to submit to injustice, and the belief in change. Through her tireless efforts, Naomi did not only change laws, but also transform the consciousness of a nation. A pivotal event occurred when a video showing a police officer using excessive force on a young person of color went viral. The community's outrage intensified, and the video became a critical point that increased pressure on lawmakers to pass the Justice and Transparency Act. Naomi used this moment to call for action, intensifying her efforts to get the bill passed. In a tense session at Congress, Naomi faced her most vehement opponents. She detailed each point of the bill, countering every argument presented by the opposition with solid evidence and reasoned argument. The debate lasted for hours, but ultimately the power of public opinion and the necessity for reform prevailed.